He mocked my paycheck in front of his wealthy circle, and I asked him to stop, but my husband just laughed and said, "Oh, come on, they know you're my little charity case," while his golf buddies chuckled into their whiskeys at our backyard barbecue last Saturday. The sound of their laughter cut through the warm evening air like broken glass. I stood there holding a tray of artisan cheeses I'd carefully selected that morning, watching my husband of 8 years publicly humiliate me while his country club friends treated it like dinner theater. Stephen raised his glass toward me in a mock toast, his Rolex catching the string lights I'd hung myself just hours before. "To my wife, the elementary school teacher who married way up." More laughter. My hands didn't shake. I set down the tray with deliberate care, smiled directly at Stephen, and said something that made his expression falter for just a fraction of a second. "I'm so glad we're all having fun tonight." What Stephen and his circle of investment bankers and tech executives didn't know was that his little charity case had been quietly documenting every suspicious financial transaction, every unexplained business trip, every hushed phone call for the past 6 months. The manila folder hidden in my classroom desk contained enough evidence to turn Stephen's carefully constructed empire of lies into rubble, but I wasn't ready yet. Not quite. I needed one more piece, and judging by the way his mistress had just walked through our back gate pretending to be Jennifer from the country club, I was about to get it. I am Rebecca Ashford, 34 years old, and I teach 4th grade at Riverside Elementary in suburban Connecticut. When I married Stephen 8 years ago, I was a bright-eyed graduate student finishing my master's in education, and he was a promising financial analyst at a boutique investment firm. His parents, particularly his mother Catherine, had made their disapproval of me crystal clear from the start. I wasn't from their world of old money and country clubs. My father was a mechanic, my mother a nurse. I had student loans. I wore clothes from Target. But Stephen insisted he loved me anyway, that his family would come around, that our differences made us stronger. For the first 3 years, I believed him. The transformation happened gradually. As Stephen climbed the corporate ladder at Hamilton Pierce Investments, the warm, funny man I'd fallen for began disappearing behind designer suits and platinum credit cards. His salary tripled, then quadrupled. We moved from our cozy apartment to this massive colonial in Fairfield County that I never wanted. He joined the country club, started playing golf every Saturday, developed a taste for 20-year-old scotch and handmade Italian shoes that cost more than my monthly salary. The comments started small. Little jabs about my teacher salary when I suggested we needed to budget. Jokes about my practical wardrobe compared to the designer labels his colleagues' wives wore. Suggestions that maybe I could take a break from working since we didn't need my income anyway. Conveniently ignoring that teaching wasn't just a job to me, it was my calling. His mother Catherine fanned these flames during every family gathering, loudly discussing Stephen's success, while pointedly asking me how little children were doing, as if working with students was somehow beneath her precious son. The backyard barbecue had been Stephen's idea, a chance to show off our newly renovated outdoor kitchen and pool to his inner circle. I'd spent the entire week preparing, not because I wanted to impress these people, but because I'd learned that maintaining appearances kept Stephen manageable. Compliant Stephen was easier to monitor than angry Stephen. For 6 months, I'd been playing the role of devoted wife while carefully building my case. Every condescending comment, every public humiliation, every time he made me feel small only strengthened my resolve. What Stephen failed to understand in his arrogance was that teachers develop exceptional skills in observation and documentation. We notice patterns, we track behavioral changes, we gather evidence methodically because our profession demands it. While he saw me as his inferior, someone who couldn't possibly comprehend his complex financial world, I'd been teaching myself forensic accounting through online courses. My boring teacher books he mocked were actually textbooks on financial fraud investigation hidden behind dust jackets. The investigation began 4 months ago when I noticed Stephen making secretive phone calls in his home office, always closing the door when I walked past. Then came the unexplained charges on credit card statements he thought I didn't see, restaurants in Manhattan on nights he claimed to be working late at the office in Stamford. The final red flag was when I overheard him on a call discussing creative accounting solutions for a client, his tone suggesting something far less legal than creative. I started small. I installed monitoring software on our shared home computer, the one Stephen carelessly left logged into his email account. I photographed documents left in his briefcase. I tracked his location through the family sharing app he'd set up years ago and forgotten about. I befriended Mary, his assistant at Hamilton Pierce, by bringing her coffee and homemade cookies during my lunch breaks, gradually earning her trust until she started sharing details about Stephen's special projects that didn't appear on any official company records. The picture that emerged was devastating in its complexity. Stephen wasn't just your average unfaithful husband. He was systematically embezzling money from his wealthiest clients through a sophisticated scheme involving offshore accounts and shell companies. He was cooking books. He was lying to the SEC. And he was sleeping with Jennifer Caldwell, the wife of his biggest client, David Caldwell, who happened to be standing 20 feet away grilling steaks, completely oblivious to the fact that his investment portfolio was being drained to fund Stephen's affair with his own wife. Saturday's barbecue wasn't just another social gathering. It was my reconnaissance mission. Every guest present represented a piece of Stephen's criminal network or a potential witness to his downfall. David Caldwell, the cuckolded client. Marcus Flynn, Stephen's partner in the embezzlement scheme who thought I was too stupid to understand their coded conversations. Catherine, Stephen's mother, who would soon learn that her precious son's success was built entirely on fraud. And Jennifer Caldwell, the mistress who just walked into our backyard wearing a dress that cost more than I made in a month, about to play her role in Stephen's destruction perfectly. After Stephen's charity case comment, I excused myself to the kitchen, ostensibly to refill the ice bucket. Through the window, I watched Jennifer make her way to Stephen's side, touching his arm with an intimacy that made several guests notice. David Caldwell noticed too, but dismissed it, trusting his friend. That trust would soon be shattered, along with everything else. I pulled out my phone and sent a carefully timed text message to an unlisted number. The response came immediately. Confirmed. Monday morning. My colleague Lauren had asked me once why I stayed after Stephen's behavior became unbearable. Why not just leave him? She'd said over coffee. Get a divorce and move on. But Lauren didn't understand. Leaving meant Stephen would keep his reputation, his career, his mother's approval. He'd spin the divorce as my failure, my inability to adapt to his lifestyle. His circle would close ranks around him while I'd be dismissed as the teacher who couldn't keep up. That wasn't justice. That was surrender. Real justice required patience. It required building an ironclad case that would strip away everything Stephen valued: his career, his wealth, his social standing, his freedom. The manila folder in my classroom desk contained bank statements showing the embezzlement, printed emails detailing the illegal transactions, photographs of Stephen and Jennifer from a private investigator I'd hired using my carefully saved money, and most damaging of all, recorded phone conversations where Stephen explicitly discussed his criminal activities. But I needed one final element. I needed Stephen to commit to the crime publicly, in front of witnesses who couldn't be intimidated or bought. The barbecue continued into the evening. Stephen held court by the pool, surrounded by his admirers, drinking expensive scotch and telling exaggerated stories about his latest investment coups. I circulated with wine bottles, playing the perfect hostess, watching Jennifer's increasing boldness as she monopolized Stephen's attention. David Caldwell was getting quieter, his eyes tracking his wife's movements with growing suspicion. Perfect. Everything was falling into place exactly as I'd planned. Around 10 o'clock, as the evening wound down, Stephen gathered everyone around the outdoor fireplace for what he called an important announcement. My pulse quickened. This wasn't part of my plan. He put his arm around my shoulders in a gesture of false affection that made my skin crawl. Rebecca and I have been talking, he began, lying smoothly, and we've decided it's time for her to retire from teaching. My practice is doing incredibly well. We certainly don't need her income, and honestly, it'll be nice to have her focused on maintaining our home and social calendar properly. The guests applauded politely. Catherine beamed with approval. Jennifer smirked, and I felt something inside me that had been held carefully in check finally break free. Not sadness, not even anger, just cold, crystalline clarity. Stephen had just made his final mistake. He'd publicly announced plans to take away the one thing that mattered most to me: my teaching career, my identity beyond being his wife, thinking I had no choice but to accept it. I smiled up at him, that same smile I'd given him earlier, and said loud enough for everyone to hear, "That's such a generous thought, honey. Though I think we should probably discuss your employment situation first, don't you? Given the meeting you have scheduled with the SEC on Monday morning? The backyard went silent. Stephen's arm dropped from my shoulders. His face, visible in the firelight, went from confident to confused to afraid in the span of 3 seconds. "What are you talking about?" he said, his voice tight. "Oh, did I spoil the surprise?" I said innocently. "I thought surely you'd want your friends to know about the federal investigation into Hamilton Pierce Investments. Or was that supposed to be a secret?" I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. "I have the email confirmation right here. Would you like me to read it aloud?" What happened next would set in motion the complete destruction of Stephen's carefully constructed world. But that night, as his golf buddies suddenly remembered other places they needed to be, as Catherine's face went pale with understanding, as David Caldwell moved protectively away from his wife and toward Stephen with murder in his eyes, I felt something I hadn't felt in years. Powerful. The real game was just beginning, and Stephen was about to learn that his little charity case had been playing chess while he was still playing checkers. The backyard cleared in less than 15 minutes. Stephen's golf buddies suddenly remembered early morning tea times, business calls, family obligations, anything to distance themselves from what they sensed was coming. Marcus Flynn left without even grabbing his jacket, his face gray with panic. Catherine gripped her purse so tightly her knuckles went white as she hurried to her Mercedes, not even bothering with her usual condescending goodbye. Only David Caldwell remained, standing perfectly still by the dying fireplace, staring at Stephen with an expression that promised violence. "David, listen. Whatever Rebecca thinks she knows." Stephen started, his voice taking on that smooth, persuasive tone he used with clients. "How much?" David interrupted. His voice was quiet, deadly calm. "How much of my money did you steal?" Stephen's mouth opened and closed. Jennifer had vanished into the house, probably looking for a back exit. I stayed exactly where I was, phone still in hand, watching this conversation unfold like a teacher monitoring a classroom confrontation, ready to intervene if necessary, but curious to see how it played itself out. "I haven't stolen anything," Stephen said, but his voice cracked on the word stolen. "Rebecca's confused. She doesn't understand complex financial instruments. The SEC doesn't open investigations because someone's wife is confused," David said. He took a step closer to Stephen. "I'm going to ask you one more time. How much?" I decided this was the moment to be helpful. According to the documents I submitted to the Securities and Exchange Commission, approximately $2.7 million from your account specifically, David, though the total across all clients appears to be closer to $8 million. Both men turned to stare at me. Stephen's face had gone from pale to flushed, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cool evening air. "You submitted documents to the SEC? Rebecca, what the hell have you done?" "I documented your crimes and reported them to the appropriate authorities," I said calmly. "Isn't that what good citizens are supposed to do?" I turned to David. "The money was funneled through a series of shell companies registered in the Cayman Islands. Stephen created fake investment opportunities, moved your money offshore, and then slowly transferred it into personal accounts under various aliases. Very sophisticated, almost impossible to trace without inside knowledge of the account structures." David's hands clenched into fists. "Stephen and I have been friends for 15 years. My wife and I welcomed you into our home. I trusted you with everything." "Speaking of your wife," I said, "you might want to check the master bedroom. I believe Jennifer went that direction about 5 minutes ago, probably trying to warn Stephen about something through text messages. They've been having an affair for approximately 18 months. The private investigator's photos are quite comprehensive." The sound David made was somewhere between a growl and a broken sob. He lunged toward the house, and Stephen, finally grasping the magnitude of his situation, ran after him shouting explanations that no one believed. I heard crashes from inside, raised voices, Jennifer's high-pitched protests. I stayed in the backyard, methodically gathering abandoned wine glasses and plates, cleaning up the debris of Stephen's shattered life one appetizer plate at a time. The police arrived 20 minutes later, called by a neighbor concerned about the noise. 2 officers separated the 3 people inside while a third came to speak with me. I was sitting calmly at the patio table, sipping tea I'd made while chaos reigned inside my home. "Ma'am, can you tell me what's happening here?" the officer asked, his hand resting casually near his weapon. My husband has been having an affair with that woman. I gestured toward the house where Jennifer was visible through the window, mascara streaming down her face. Her husband found out tonight. There was a confrontation. No one's been seriously hurt, though I believe some furniture may have been damaged. I paused. Also, my husband is currently under federal investigation for securities fraud and embezzlement. The SEC will be contacting him Monday morning with formal charges. That information may be relevant to your report. The officer's eyebrows rose. You're remarkably calm about all this. I'm a teacher, I said. I've dealt with worse tantrums from 9-year-olds. They took statements from everyone. Jennifer claimed she was just visiting a friend, until I helpfully provided the officer with several dated photographs from my phone showing her and Stephen in decidedly non-friendly embraces. David had to be physically restrained when Stephen tried to claim the affair was just a mistake. Stephen himself kept insisting I was making everything up, that I was mentally unstable, that I didn't understand what I'd seen. The documents I provided to the SEC include your email correspondence with Marcus Flynn discussing creative redistribution of client assets, I told him in front of the officers. Also your text messages to Jennifer confirming wire transfers to your shared offshore account, and the recordings of your phone calls with the Cayman Islands bank manager. Would you like me to play those recordings? I have them backed up in 3 separate locations. Stephen's face went from red to white. You've been spying on me? That's illegal. Those recordings can't be used. Actually, Connecticut is a one-party consent state for recording conversations, I said pleasantly. I checked with a lawyer. Since I was present during many of those calls, even if you didn't know I was listening outside your office door, my recordings are completely admissible. The rest came from security cameras I installed in our home 6 months ago. You signed a form authorizing their installation, remember? You were so busy with your golf trip you barely glanced at the paperwork. The look on his face when he realized he'd authorized his own surveillance was almost worth 8 years of condescension and humiliation. Almost. The officers eventually left, warning everyone to stay away from each other. David departed with promises of lawsuits that would destroy Stephen completely. Jennifer fled in an Uber, her marriage presumably as finished as Stephen's career. And Stephen stood in the wreckage of our living room, the room where David had apparently thrown a very expensive vase at him, staring at me like I was a stranger. Why? He finally asked. Why did you do this? You called me your charity case, I said simply, in front of your friends. While I was holding cheese I bought with my pathetic teacher salary. You announced you were forcing me to quit my job without even asking me. And you've been systematically making me feel worthless for 3 years while stealing from people who trusted you and sleeping with your best friend's wife. I set down my teacup. Did you really think there would be no consequences? I gave you everything, he shouted. This house, the car, the lifestyle. You'd be nothing without me. I am nothing because of you, I corrected. Or rather, you tried very hard to make me nothing. But here's what you never understood, Stephen. Teachers don't make much money, but we're not stupid. We know how to research. We know how to document. We know how to build a case brick by brick until it's absolutely unshakable. And we definitely know the difference between right and wrong. He sank onto the couch, head in his hands. The SEC investigation. Is that real? Very real. I spent 6 months building the case before I submitted it. Every transaction documented. Every shell company traced. Every law you broke carefully cited with legal precedent. The investigator assigned to your case told me it's one of the most thorough fraud reports they've ever received from a civilian. I stood up. Your meeting is Monday at 9 a.m. I'd suggest you hire a very good criminal defense attorney. You're going to need one. What about us? He asked, and there was something almost pathetic in his voice. Our marriage? I filed for divorce 3 weeks ago. You were served yesterday at your office, but you apparently shoved the papers in your briefcase without reading them. You'll find them highlighted on your desk upstairs, along with a complete financial disclosure statement I prepared. Since your assets are about to be seized by federal authorities to repay your victims, I'm not asking for much. Just my teacher pension that I earned before we married, my personal items, and my car that I paid for myself. You can keep the house. You'll need to sell it anyway to pay your legal fees. Stephen looked up at me, And for the first time in years, I saw him actually see me. Not his charity case, not his inferior, but the woman who'd just dismantled his entire existence with the same methodical care she used to grade spelling tests. I underestimated you. Yes, I agreed. You did, repeatedly, fatally. Will you testify against me? I already have. My deposition was recorded last Thursday. The prosecutor has assured me it will be very compelling to a jury. I picked up my keys from the hall table. I'm staying at a hotel tonight, probably for the foreseeable future. My attorney will be in touch about the divorce proceedings. Oh, and Stephen? Your mother called me earlier today. She somehow got wind of the investigation and wanted to know if it was true. I told her everything. She hung up on me, but I imagine you'll be hearing from her shortly. Good luck with that conversation. I walked toward the door, then paused and turned back. You know what the saddest part is? If you'd just treated me with basic respect, if you'd valued my career the way I tried to value yours, if you'd been the man I married instead of the one you became, none of this would have happened. You didn't lose everything because I'm vindictive. You lost everything because you earned it. The drive to the hotel gave me time to process what I'd just set in motion. My phone buzzed constantly with text messages. Lauren wrote, OMG, what happened? Someone posted a video from tonight and you're trending on local Facebook. Mary, Stephen's assistant, sent, the partners at Hamilton Pierce were called into an emergency meeting. They know. Everyone knows. Thank you for warning me last week. And most surprisingly, my principal, Dr. Morrison. Whatever you're dealing with, your job is safe. We'd never lose you. You're one of our best. The hotel room was small and plain, nothing like the designer showcase Stephen had insisted our home become. I ordered room service, took a long shower, and finally allowed myself to feel the weight of what I'd done. Not regret, never regret, but acknowledgement that I'd just burned down my marriage, exposed my husband's crimes, and publicly humiliated his mother's precious, perfect son. The old Rebecca might have felt guilty. The new Rebecca felt only satisfaction. My lawyer, Patricia Chen, called at 11 p.m. Rebecca, I just heard about tonight. Are you safe? Perfectly safe. Stephen's too shocked to be dangerous, and I'm not at the house anyway. Good. I've been reviewing the documents you provided for the divorce case. Combined with the federal investigation, this is going to be remarkably straightforward. Stephen has no leverage, no credibility, and very soon no assets. The judge will grant the divorce quickly, especially with evidence of adultery and financial crimes. How quickly? 90 days, maybe less. Connecticut allows expedited divorces when there's significant cause. Patricia paused. Rebecca, you built one hell of a case against him. I've been practicing family law for 20 years, and I've never seen anything this thorough from a client. You could honestly consider a career change to legal investigation. I laughed. I like teaching fourth graders. They're more honest than most adults. After we hung up, I opened my laptop and began drafting tomorrow's lesson plans. Life went on. My students deserved my full attention, regardless of personal drama. As I outlined a unit on the Revolutionary War, I couldn't help but see the parallels. Sometimes revolution is necessary. Sometimes the established order needs to be torn down. Sometimes the underdog wins not through force, but through strategy, patience, and refusing to accept an unjust status quo. My phone buzzed one more time. An unknown number. This is David Caldwell. I don't know how to thank you for exposing what Stephen did. My attorney will be contacting you. Anything you need for your testimony, anything at all, just ask. I'm filing my own lawsuit Monday morning. Stephen is finished. I typed back. I'm sorry for what Jennifer did to you. You deserved better friends. His response came immediately. So did you. Stephen never deserved you. Good luck with everything. I set my phone aside and returned to my lesson plans, but my mind drifted to Monday morning. In 48 hours, Stephen would be sitting across from federal investigators, his perfect life crumbling, his crimes exposed, his reputation destroyed. His mother would be fielding calls from horrified country club friends. Marcus Flynn would probably flip on Stephen to save himself, providing even more evidence of the scheme. And Jennifer would be facing her own marital reckoning. Meanwhile, I would be teaching my students about the Boston Tea Party, about standing up to injustice, about how sometimes the powerful underestimate the determined. I'd be doing exactly what I loved, what Stephen had tried to take from me. The divorce would be final in 90 days. The criminal trial would take longer, but the outcome was inevitable. Stephen was going to prison, losing everything he'd stolen and everything he'd built on lies. And I would be free. Free of his condescension, his cruelty, his mother's disapproval, the suffocating weight of a life I'd never wanted. Free to be exactly who I was. Rebecca Ashford, elementary school teacher, woman who refused to be anyone's charity case. The woman who brought down an empire with patience, documentation, and the kind of meticulous attention to detail that made her excellent at teaching 9-year-olds and apparently also at destroying corrupt investment bankers. As I finally turned off the light and settled into the uncomfortable hotel bed, I thought about Stephen's question. Why did you do this? The real answer was simpler than he'd ever understand. I did it because I could. Because I was smarter than he thought. Because being underestimated is sometimes the greatest weapon you can have. And because some people need to learn the hardest way possible that treating others as inferior will eventually come back to destroy them. Tomorrow, I'd return to my classroom. Stephen would wake up to the reality of his Monday morning appointment with federal investigators, and the real consequences of 8 years of humiliation were just beginning. Monday morning arrived with unexpected sunshine. I stood in my classroom arranging books for the week's lessons, the normalcy of the routine steadying my nerves. My students would arrive in 20 minutes, blissfully unaware that their teacher had spent the weekend dismantling her husband's criminal empire. I'd stopped at my favorite coffee shop on the way to school, exchanged pleasantries with the barista who always remembered my order, graded papers in the teacher's lounge surrounded by colleagues who knew nothing about Saturday night's explosion. This compartmentalization felt necessary, protective even. Teaching was my sanctuary, and I refused to let Stephen's downfall contaminate this space. Dr. Morrison appeared in my doorway at 7:45, his expression concerned but kind. "Rebecca, do you have a moment?" My stomach tightened. Had news spread to the administration? Of course. He closed the door behind him. "I received a rather disturbing phone call last night from Catherine Walsh. She claimed you'd filed false reports against her son with federal authorities, and that you were using your position here to gain sympathy. She suggested we place you on administrative leave pending an investigation into your mental stability." The audacity took my breath away. Catherine was trying to get me fired, to take away my career just like Stephen had planned. Dr. Morrison, everything I reported to the SEC is documented and verifiable. Stephen is indeed under investigation for securities fraud. His meeting with federal investigators is happening right now, actually. I checked my watch. Started about 15 minutes ago. I know. I contacted the SEC myself this morning to verify. He smiled slightly. Catherine Walsh doesn't dictate staffing decisions at this school. I called to inform you that we fully support you during this difficult time, and to warn you that she may try other avenues to cause you trouble. Be careful. After he left, I sat at my desk processing this development. Catherine was mobilizing her resources, trying to destroy my reputation before Stephen's crimes became public knowledge. It was exactly the move I'd anticipated, which was why I'd already taken precautions. The manila folder in my locked desk drawer contained a second set of documents, these ones detailing Catherine's own questionable activities, tax fraud through her charitable foundation, insurance fraud after a suspicious fire at one of her rental properties, and most damaging, her knowledge of Stephen's crimes dating back at least 2 years based on emails I'd recovered from Stephen's computer. Catherine had known what her son was doing and had helped him hide it. She'd even provided introductions to several of the wealthy clients Stephen had subsequently defrauded, making her potentially liable as an accessory. I hadn't submitted this evidence to the SEC yet, saving it for exactly this moment when Catherine would inevitably try to retaliate against me. She'd just made her first move. Now I would make mine. During my lunch break, I called Patricia. Stephen's mother is trying to get me fired. She contacted my principal claiming I'm mentally unstable. Predictable. We'll send her attorney a cease and desist letter this afternoon. Also, Rebecca, the SEC investigator, called me this morning. Stephen's interview isn't going well. He showed up with a public defender because apparently his regular attorney refused to represent him after reviewing the evidence. He's trying to claim you fabricated everything, but when they presented your recordings, he couldn't explain them away. What about Marcus Flynn? Flipped immediately. Gave up everything in exchange for a reduced sentence. Stephen's completely isolated now. No attorney worth hiring will touch him, his partner betrayed him, and the evidence is overwhelming. The prosecutor expects to file formal charges by end of week. After school, I drove to the police station where I'd arranged to meet with Detective Sarah Martinez, the lead investigator on David Caldwell's formal complaint against Stephen. She'd requested a detailed statement from me about Stephen's activities and my investigation. Mrs. Walsh, I have to say, this is the most comprehensive private investigation I've seen from a civilian, Detective Martinez said, reviewing the documents I'd provided. You should seriously consider a career change. We could use someone with your skills. I'm happy teaching, I said, but I had strong motivation. Your husband's attorney is trying to claim you entrapped him, that you deliberately created situations to make him incriminate himself. I created nothing. I simply documented what was already happening. I leaned forward. Detective, Stephen has been committing these crimes for at least 3 years. I didn't force him to steal money. I didn't force him to create shell companies. I didn't force him to have an affair. All I did was pay attention and take notes. She nodded. The DA agrees. Your evidence will be crucial at trial. Are you prepared for how ugly this might get? Defense attorneys sometimes try to discredit witnesses by attacking their character, their marriage, their motivations. Let them try. I have nothing to hide. Stephen, on the other hand, has everything to hide, and it's all already exposed. That evening, I returned to the house for the first time since Saturday night. Stephen's car was gone. The interior looked like a tornado had hit it, papers scattered everywhere, drawers hanging open, evidence of frantic searching. He'd been looking for the recordings, the documents, anything he could use to discredit my investigation. He wouldn't find anything. Every piece of evidence existed in multiple locations: Patricia's law office, a safe deposit box, encrypted cloud storage, and with the federal investigators. I packed methodically, loading boxes with clothes, books, personal items I'd accumulated over 8 years. The designer wardrobe Stephen had insisted I maintain, clothes that had never felt like mine, I left hanging in the closet. Let him sell them to pay his legal fees. I took only what mattered: photographs from before our marriage when I was still happy, my grandmother's jewelry, teaching materials I'd paid for myself, the first edition poetry collection my father had given me when I graduated college. My phone rang as I loaded the last box into my car. Unknown number. I almost didn't answer. Rebecca? It's Jennifer Caldwell. Her voice sounded small, broken. Please don't hang up. I just wanted to say I'm sorry. For everything. David filed for divorce. He took the kids. Everyone knows what I did. My parents won't speak to me. I lost everything. I leaned against my car, surprised by my own lack of sympathy. You lost everything because you chose to have an affair with your husband's best friend. I lost nothing because I chose to expose crimes. Those aren't equivalent situations, Jennifer. Stephen told me you didn't understand him, that you weren't sophisticated enough for his world, that you made him feel trapped. Stephen lied to you just like he lied to everyone else. It's what he does. I paused. Did he mention that he was stealing from David while sleeping with you? That he used your affair to manipulate both of you into trusting him? You weren't special to Stephen. You were useful. She made a choked sound. I know that now. God, I was so stupid. Yes, you were. But unlike Stephen, your stupidity was legal. You'll rebuild your life eventually. He won't. I ended the call before she could respond. Her tears, her regrets, her destroyed marriage, none of it moved me. Jennifer had made her choices. Now she lived with the consequences. Tuesday brought developments I'd been anticipating. The local newspaper ran a front-page story. Prominent investment manager under federal investigation for fraud. Stephen's photo, the professional headshot he'd paid $500 for, stared out from newsstands across town. The article detailed the allegations, the amount stolen, the number of victims. It mentioned me only briefly. Walsh's wife, a local elementary school teacher, reportedly provided substantial evidence to federal investigators after discovering irregularities in her husband's financial records. My phone exploded with messages. Old college friends I hadn't heard from in years, reporters requesting interviews, 3 separate book agents asking if I'd consider writing about my experience. I ignored all of it, focusing instead on my classroom. My students noticed nothing different. We studied the Revolutionary War. We practiced long division. We read about ecosystems. This normalcy felt like armor, protecting me from the chaos swirling outside. Wednesday afternoon, Patricia called with news. Stephen's attorney filed a motion claiming you violated his privacy by installing cameras in your home without his knowledge. The judge reviewed the authorization form you had him sign and dismissed the motion. Also, Catherine Walsh's attorney contacted me threatening a defamation lawsuit if you spread lies about the family. I haven't spoken to anyone except law enforcement and you. I know. She's desperate. Her social standing is crumbling. Half the country club has canceled their memberships to avoid association with the Walsh family. Her charitable foundation is under investigation now, too, thanks to some anonymous tips the SEC received about financial irregularities. I smiled. How anonymous? Very, completely untraceable, professional even. Patricia's tone suggested she knew exactly who'd sent those tips. Rebecca, Catherine Walsh is dangerous when cornered. Be careful. That warning proved prescient. Thursday evening, as I left school, I found my car's tires slashed, all 4 of them. No witnesses, no cameras in the parking lot. But the message was clear. Someone wanted me to feel threatened. I called the police, filed a report, called a tow truck. As I waited, Dr. Morrison came outside. I'm installing security cameras in the parking lot tomorrow, he said firmly. This is unacceptable. You deserve to feel safe here. Thank you. I meant it. The support from my school, my students' oblivious normalcy, the routine of teaching, these things kept me grounded while everything else burned. The police report noted suspicious activity, but had no leads. I suspected Catherine, but couldn't prove it. Patricia advised documenting everything. Build a harassment case if needed. But Rebecca, maybe consider a restraining order against the Walsh family. Not yet. Let them make mistakes. Desperate people always do. Friday brought the formal charges. Stephen was arrested at his apartment. Now a modest rental since he'd been forced to sell our house to pay preliminary legal fees. The charges were extensive: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. Marcus Flynn's testimony had strengthened the case significantly. The prosecutor scheduled a press conference where she praised the thorough investigation by the victim's wife, whose careful documentation made this prosecution possible. That evening, I watched the press conference on the local news from my new apartment, a small 1-bedroom in a secure building near the school. The prosecutor displayed charts showing the money trail, explained the shell companies, detailed the victims. When asked about me, she said, Mrs. Walsh exemplifies the importance of citizen involvement in exposing financial crimes. Her meticulous documentation and cooperation with law enforcement has been invaluable. My phone rang immediately. Catherine. I let it go to voicemail. Her message was venomous. You've destroyed this family. My son's life is ruined because of your vindictive lies. You'll pay for this, Rebecca. I promise you, you'll pay. I saved the message, sent it to Patricia, and blocked Catherine's number. The threat was clear, but also foolish. Every hostile action she took only strengthened the case I was building against her. Saturday morning brought an unexpected visitor. David Caldwell appeared at my apartment door, looking tired but determined. I hope I'm not intruding. I got your address from my attorney. I wanted to thank you in person. I invited him in, offered coffee. We sat in my sparse living room, 2 people whose lives had been devastated by the same man. Stephen stole everything from me, David said. My savings, my retirement, my marriage. But you gave me something back. Justice. The truth. I'm rebuilding my financial life, working with the FBI to potentially recover some assets. But more importantly, I know what happened. I'm not wondering, not second-guessing. You gave me that closure. I'm glad it helped. I'm sorry about Jennifer. He shook his head. Jennifer made her choices. I'm focusing on my kids now, making sure they understand that their parents' failures don't define them. He paused. Steven's attorney contacted mine yesterday. He wants to negotiate a settlement in my civil suit. He's offering $200,000. Don't take it. Steven's going to prison. His assets will be seized and distributed among victims. Hold out for the full amount through the court system. That's what my attorney said. I just wanted to hear it from you. He stood to leave, then turned back. What you did took courage. Not just the investigation, but standing up to someone who'd been making you feel small for years. That's harder than people realize. After he left, I sat alone thinking about courage. I'd never felt brave. I'd felt angry, methodical, determined. But maybe courage wasn't feeling fearless. Maybe it was acting despite fear, documenting despite intimidation, standing firm despite pressure to surrender. Maybe courage was teaching 4th grade on Monday morning after dismantling your husband's life on Saturday night. Sunday, I visited my parents for the first time since the scandal broke. They lived an hour away, had followed the news with horror and pride. My mother hugged me tightly at the door. We always knew Steven was trouble, Dad said over dinner. Too smooth, too concerned with appearances, but you seemed happy, so we kept quiet. I wasn't happy. I was performing. There's a difference. I helped Mom clear the dishes. I need you both to be careful. Catherine Walsh is unpredictable right now. If she contacts you, don't engage. Tell her to speak to my attorney. That woman has always been poison, Mom said. Remember your wedding? The way she looked at your dress like you'd worn rags? The comments about your father being a mechanic like honest work was shameful? I remembered. The entire wedding had been Catherine's thinly veiled disappointment that Steven hadn't married someone from their social class. She's about to face consequences for helping Steven hide his crimes. I submitted evidence to the SEC about her involvement last week. Dad's eyebrows rose. You've been busy. I learned from the best. You always taught me to finish what I start and do it thoroughly. The drive back to my apartment gave me time to reflect on the past 10 days. Since Saturday's barbecue, Steven had been arrested, his crimes exposed, his career destroyed. Marcus Flynn had turned state's witness. Jennifer's marriage had imploded. David was rebuilding. Catherine was threatening. And I was teaching, documenting, methodically continuing the work I'd started. The criminal trial was scheduled for January, giving me 3 months to prepare my testimony. The divorce would be final before then. Patricia had negotiated a favorable settlement since Steven's assets were largely frozen. I'd keep my pension, my car, my personal belongings. He'd keep his criminal record. But something else was happening. Something I hadn't anticipated. Other women had started contacting me through social media, through mutual acquaintances, women in similar situations who'd seen the news coverage. How did you find the courage to document everything? One asked. I know my husband is having an affair, but I'm afraid of what happens if I confront him. I started responding carefully, offering practical advice about protecting assets, documenting evidence, finding good attorneys. These conversations gave my experience unexpected purpose. Yes, I'd destroyed Steven to protect myself and seek justice. But inadvertently, I'd also provided a roadmap for other women trapped in toxic marriages, dealing with financial abuse, suffering under partners who made them feel worthless. Monday morning, I returned to my classroom feeling stronger. 2 weeks had passed since the barbecue. Steven was awaiting trial. Catherine was under investigation. Marcus was cooperating. Jennifer was in therapy. David was rebuilding. And I was exactly where I belonged, teaching my students about how small actions compound into revolution, how documentation creates accountability, how justice sometimes takes patience but eventually arrives. The manila folder that had started everything sat in my locked desk drawer, now mostly empty since I'd turned over its contents to authorities. But I'd kept one thing. Steven's charity case comment, written in my own handwriting on the day it happened, dated and detailed. A reminder of why I'd done this. Not from hatred, though I'd certainly felt that. Not from revenge alone, though satisfaction was real. But from fundamental refusal to accept being diminished, to let cruelty go unanswered, to remain silent while crimes continued. My students would never know that their teacher had spent her evenings building a federal case against a white-collar criminal. They'd never know about the recordings, the surveillance, the careful cultivation of witnesses. They'd just know that Mrs. Ashford taught them well, treated them fairly, and showed them through example that intelligence applied patiently could accomplish extraordinary things. As I erased the whiteboard and prepared for afternoon dismissal, I thought about Stephen sitting in his rental apartment, likely reviewing legal documents he couldn't afford to properly defend against. I thought about Catherine making calls to attorneys who were increasingly reluctant to associate with the Walsh family name. I thought about the 37 victims who'd received letters informing them they were part of a federal fraud case and might eventually recover portions of their stolen money. And I thought about Saturday's barbecue, the moment Stephen had called me his charity case, the moment his golf buddies had left, the moment I'd smiled and decided that everything I'd been planning would happen exactly as designed. Some moments change everything. That had been mine. Not the beginning of the investigation, that had started months earlier. But the moment I decided there would be no mercy, no second chances, no gentle letting go. The moment I decided Stephen would lose absolutely everything. The bell rang. My students grabbed their backpacks and lined up at the door, chattering about homework and weekend plans. I walked them to the buses, waved goodbye, returned to my classroom to finish grading papers. Normal life. Routine life. The life Stephen had tried to take from me by announcing I'd quit teaching. The life I'd fought to keep by destroying his. Tomorrow would bring new developments. Catherine would probably make another move. Stephen's attorney would file more desperate motions. The news cycle would continue its fascination with the scandal. But right now, in this moment, I was just Rebecca Ashford, elementary school teacher, woman who'd refused to be diminished, and I was exactly where I belonged. The trial began on a freezing January morning. I'd spent 3 months preparing my testimony with the prosecution team, reviewing documents I'd submitted, ensuring every detail was accurate and defensible. Stephen's defense attorney, a young public defender named Mark Fisher, who'd drawn the short straw on this unwinnable case, had tried numerous pretrial motions to exclude my evidence. Every motion failed. The judge, a stern woman named Honor Patricia Thornton, had reviewed my documentation and deemed it exceptionally thorough and legally obtained. I arrived at the courthouse 45 minutes early wearing a navy blue suit I'd purchased specifically for this purpose. Professional, credible. The kind of outfit a teacher would wear to a school board meeting. Patricia met me in the hallway outside the courtroom. Stephen's attorney will try to paint you as a scorned wife fabricating evidence for revenge, she warned. Stay calm, stick to facts. Don't let him provoke an emotional response. I've dealt with angry parents questioning my teaching methods. I think I can handle a desperate public defender. The courtroom filled quickly. David Caldwell sat in the front row with several other victims. Behind them, reporters occupied every available seat, notebooks ready. Catherine Walsh sat alone on the defense side, her usual imperious expression replaced with something harder to read. Maybe fear, maybe fury, definitely desperation. She wouldn't look at me. Stephen was led in wearing an orange jumpsuit, his wrists shackled. He'd lost weight, his expensive haircut grown shaggy, his usual polished appearance replaced by the hollow look of someone whose world had collapsed. When his eyes found mine across the courtroom, I felt nothing. Not satisfaction, not pity, nothing. He was simply the defendant in a criminal trial, no longer my husband, barely even recognizable as the man I'd married. The prosecution's opening statement laid out the case methodically. Assistant District Attorney Linda Morrison detailed the shell companies, the offshore accounts, the falsified documents. She explained how Stephen had systematically stolen from clients who trusted him, how he'd used his position to exploit their confidence, how the scheme had continued for 3 years before being exposed. And it would have continued longer, she said, turning to face the jury, except for the extraordinary investigative work of the defendant's wife, Rebecca Ashford, who documented these crimes with meticulous care and brought them to the attention of federal authorities. You'll hear her testimony this afternoon. You'll see the evidence she gathered. And you'll understand why this prosecution has been called one of the strongest white-collar crime cases in Connecticut history. Mark Fisher's opening statement was brief and unconvincing. He claimed Stephen was a hard-working investment manager who'd made questionable decisions under extreme financial pressure, but never intended to defraud anyone. He suggested I'd misunderstood complex financial transactions and had created a false narrative out of marital spite. The jury looked skeptical before he'd even finished. The prosecution spent the morning calling expert witnesses. Forensic accountants traced the money trails. SEC investigators explained the regulatory violations. FBI agents testified about the Cayman Islands accounts. Each witness built upon the previous testimony, creating an overwhelming picture of deliberate, sophisticated fraud. I was called after lunch. As I walked to the witness stand, I caught Catherine's glare, full of pure hatred. I raised my right hand and swore to tell the truth. Linda Morrison approached with a warm, professional smile. "Mrs. Ashford, please tell the jury how you first became aware of your husband's criminal activities." I'd practiced this testimony dozens of times. My voice was steady, clear, emotionless. I noticed Stephen taking secretive phone calls approximately 9 months ago. He would close his office door when I approached, lower his voice, use terms that seemed deliberately vague. This was unusual behavior for him. "What did you do?" Initially, nothing, but the behavior continued and escalated. He became defensive when I asked about his work. He started spending more evenings at the office. I found credit card charges for expensive dinners in Manhattan on nights he claimed to be working late in Stamford, which is 30 miles away. When did you decide to investigate further? When I overheard a phone call where Stephen discussed creative redistribution of client assets. I'm a teacher, not a financial expert, but those words raised concerns. Creative redistribution sounded like a euphemism for something illegal. Linda Morrison walked me through my investigation step by step, installing the monitoring software, finding the emails, photographing documents, recording phone calls, hiring the private investigator who documented the affair with Jennifer. The jury listened intently as I explained how I'd taught myself basic forensic accounting to understand what Stephen was doing. "Why didn't you confront your husband directly?" she asked. "Because I needed proof. Stephen is very persuasive. If I'd confronted him without evidence, he would have explained it away, made me doubt what I'd seen, possibly destroyed evidence. I couldn't let that happen. These weren't victimless crimes. Real people were being hurt financially. I felt obligated to build a complete case before taking action." "Did you ever consider that you might be wrong about your suspicions?" "Yes. Frequently. I hoped I was wrong, but every new piece of evidence confirmed the pattern. The shell companies Stephen had created, the offshore accounts in names that weren't his but were clearly controlled by him, the money transfers that didn't match any legitimate investment activity. I wanted to be wrong, but I wasn't." Mark Fisher's cross-examination was predictably aggressive. He implied I'd invaded Stephen's privacy out of jealousy. I calmly pointed out that Connecticut's one-party consent laws made my recordings legal since I was present during the calls. He suggested I'd misinterpreted complex financial transactions. I asked if he'd like me to explain the difference between legitimate investment vehicles and illegal shell companies designed to hide stolen money. He wisely declined. "Mrs. Ashford, isn't it true that you were angry about your husband's success? That his career advancement made you feel inferior?" "No. I was proud to be a teacher. I still am. What made me feel inferior was my husband systematically belittling my career, calling me his charity case in front of guests, announcing he was forcing me to quit my job without consulting me. But those personal humiliations, while hurtful, aren't why I reported his crimes. I reported them because they were crimes affecting real victims. You filed for divorce 3 weeks before the SEC investigation became public. That timing seems convenient." The timing was deliberate. I wanted legal separation from Stephen before his arrest to protect myself from any potential financial liability for his crimes. My attorney advised me that was prudent. "So, you admit this was calculated?" "Yes, very calculated. I spent 6 months carefully documenting federal crimes. Of course it was calculated. Catching criminals requires planning, Mr. Fisher. I'm a teacher. Planning is literally my job." Several jurors smiled at that. Mark Fisher looked frustrated but had no effective rebuttal. Linda Morrison's redirect was brief, simply asking me to confirm that everything I'd submitted to authorities was accurate and truthful. I confirmed it was. As I stepped down from the witness stand, I felt lighter somehow. The testimony was done. The evidence was presented. Whatever happened next was out of my hands. but I'd done everything possible to ensure justice. The next witness was Marcus Flynn, testifying under his plea agreement. He described the scheme in detail from his perspective, confirming everything I'd documented and adding new information about how they'd recruited clients, how they'd hidden the transactions, how Stephen had pressured him to continue even when Marcus expressed concerns. "Did you want to stop?" Linda Morrison asked him. "Many times." But Stephen was convincing. He said we'd gotten away with it so long that we were untouchable. He said his wife was too stupid to figure anything out even if she somehow saw the documents. Marcus looked at me apologetically. He was wrong about that. David Caldwell testified about the devastating financial impact, how he'd trusted Stephen completely, how learning about the affair and the fraud simultaneously had nearly destroyed him. Several other victims followed, each describing the emotional and financial toll. The jury's expressions grew progressively more horrified and sympathetic toward the victims. The defense called only 2 witnesses. A character witness who knew Stephen from the country club testified that he'd always seemed honest and hardworking, but admitted under cross-examination that he had no knowledge of Stephen's actual business practices. Stephen's accountant testified about the complexity of investment management regulations, attempting to suggest the violations were technical rather than criminal. The prosecution demolished this testimony by showing him specific emails where Stephen explicitly discussed hiding money from clients. Stephen himself did not testify. Mark Fisher wisely recognized that putting Stephen on the stand would only give the prosecution opportunity to destroy him with his own recorded words. The defense rested after just 4 hours. Closing arguments were devastating. Linda Morrison systematically presented the evidence, reminding the jury that fraud isn't complicated when stripped of financial jargon. Stephen Walsh stole money from people who trusted him. He lied about where their money was going. He created fake companies to hide the theft. He lived lavishly on stolen funds while his victims lost their savings. The evidence isn't ambiguous. His own emails prove guilt. His partner confirmed the conspiracy. His wife documented everything. The only question for you to decide is whether you believe that evidence, and frankly, ladies and gentlemen, no reasonable person could review this evidence and conclude anything except that Stephen Walsh is guilty on all counts. Mark Fisher's closing was subdued, almost apologetic. He asked for reasonable doubt that didn't exist, suggested Stephen might have been confused or overwhelmed rather than criminal, and ultimately seemed to be going through motions even he didn't believe in. The jury deliberated for 3.5 hours. When they returned, the 4 women stood and read the verdicts. Guilty on all counts: securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, tax evasion. Every single charge. Stephen's face went white. Catherine made a strangled sound from the gallery. Mark Fisher looked relieved it was over. Judge Thornton scheduled sentencing for 2 weeks later, remanding Stephen to custody without bail given his conviction and flight risk. As bailiffs led him away in shackles, Stephen finally looked at me again. His expression was hollow, defeated, stripped of all the arrogance I'd once found attractive. I held his gaze until he looked away first. Outside the courthouse, reporters swarmed. I made a brief statement that Patricia had helped me prepare. I'm grateful the justice system worked as intended. These crimes hurt real people, and today's verdict acknowledges that harm. I hope this case demonstrates that anyone can make a difference by paying attention and refusing to stay silent in the face of wrongdoing. Thank you. Linda Morrison held her own press conference praising the verdict and announcing that sentencing recommendations would include significant prison time. David Caldwell spoke about relief and closure. Marcus Flynn's attorney issued a statement about cooperation and accepting responsibility. I drove back to my apartment feeling strangely empty. The trial was over. Sentencing would be procedural. Stephen was convicted. But now what? For 6 months, my life had been focused on this singular goal: expose Stephen's crimes, ensure he faced consequences, protect myself and his victims. That goal was accomplished. The vacuum it left felt disorienting. Patricia called that evening. Congratulations. That was one of the cleanest convictions I've seen in a fraud case. The judge was clearly impressed with your documentation. What happens now? Sentencing in 2 weeks. Stephen's looking at 15 to 20 years based on the guidelines and severity. Marcus Flynn will probably get 3 to 5 since he cooperated. Your divorce will be finalized next week since the criminal conviction removes any remaining complications. And Catherine? The SEC investigation into her activities is ongoing. They're building a separate case against her for tax fraud and accessory after the fact. That'll take a few more months, but your evidence against her is solid. She'll face charges eventually. After we hung up, I sat in my small apartment and allowed myself to feel the full weight of what I'd accomplished. Stephen was convicted. His victims would have opportunity for restitution. Catherine would face her own reckoning. Jennifer's marriage was destroyed. Marcus was cooperating. And I was free, legally, financially, emotionally free from a marriage that had nearly consumed my identity. But more than that, I'd proven something to myself. That being underestimated was a form of power. That patience and documentation could topple empires. That a fourth-grade teacher with determination and time could dismantle a sophisticated financial crime operation. That refusing to accept being diminished, refusing to stay silent, refusing to be anyone's charity case could lead to extraordinary results. My phone buzzed with a text from Dr. Morrison. Saw the news. Proud of you. Your classroom is waiting whenever you're ready to return. I'd taken a week off for the trial, using accumulated sick days. Tomorrow I'd return to teaching, to lesson plans about the American Revolution and long division and ecosystems. My students didn't need to know their teacher had just helped send a white-collar criminal to prison. They just needed to know that Mrs. Ashford showed up every day, taught with passion, and demonstrated through her actions that standing up for what's right matters even when it's difficult. The sentencing in 2 weeks would be the final chapter. Until then, I had papers to grade, lessons to plan, a life to continue living. Stephen Walsh was convicted. Soon he'd be sentenced. But more importantly, Rebecca Ashford was free. Sentencing day arrived with the kind of bitter cold that makes Connecticut winters memorable. I stood outside the courthouse at 7:30 in the morning, watching my breath turn to mist, waiting for the doors to open. Patricia arrived moments later carrying her briefcase and 2 coffees. "I brought you something stronger than what you usually drink," she said, handing me a cup. "Today might be emotionally complicated." She was right. Despite everything Stephen had done, despite my role in his conviction, watching a judge sentence my former husband to decades in prison would mark a definitive end to the life I'd once imagined having. Not the life I'd actually had, that had been dying slowly for years, but the dream of what marriage could have been if Stephen had been a different man, or if I'd recognized sooner what he was becoming. The courtroom filled with familiar faces. David Caldwell and several other victims occupied the front rows, ready to give impact statements. Linda Morrison reviewed her notes at the prosecution table. Mark Fisher sat alone at the defense table, looking tired and relieved this case was finally concluding. Catherine Walsh was notably absent, not surprising given her own legal troubles were intensifying. Stephen was let in wearing the same orange jumpsuit from the trial. 2 weeks in custody had aged him further. His hair had grown completely unkempt, dark circles shadowed his eyes, and he moved with the defeated shuffle of someone who'd accepted his fate. When he saw me sitting in the gallery, his expression crumpled momentarily before he forced it back into stoic resignation. Judge Thornton entered and called the court to order. "We're here for sentencing in the matter of United States versus Stephen Walsh. Before I announce the sentence, I'll hear victim impact statements." She looked at David Caldwell. "Mr. Caldwell, you may proceed." David stood, unfolding a sheet of paper with shaking hands. "Your Honor, Stephen Walsh wasn't just my financial advisor. He was my friend for 15 years. I trusted him with my family's future, and he used that trust to steal $2.7 million from my accounts. But the financial loss, as devastating as it was, isn't the worst damage." His voice broke. "He slept with my wife. He destroyed my marriage. He made me question my judgment about everyone and everything. My children watched their father fall apart when the truth came out. That psychological damage, that betrayal of friendship and trust, is something no restitution can repair." 3 more victims spoke, each describing financial ruin, delayed retirements, lost businesses, children's college funds, stolen. One elderly woman wept as she explained how Stephen's theft had forced her to move from her home of 40 years into a small apartment because she could no longer afford her mortgage. The cumulative effect was devastating. By the fourth statement, even Mark Fisher looked uncomfortable. Linda Morrison stood for the prosecution's sentencing recommendation. Your Honor, the federal guidelines suggest 15 to 20 years for crimes of this magnitude. The prosecution recommends the maximum. Mr. Walsh showed no remorse during trial, has not cooperated with authorities, and continues to maintain his innocence despite overwhelming evidence. His crimes were sophisticated, prolonged, and caused severe harm to numerous victims. The court should send a clear message that white-collar criminals who exploit trust will face serious consequences. Mark Fisher's plea for leniency was brief and half-hearted. He mentioned Stephen's lack of prior criminal record, his difficult childhood, a lie since Stephen had grown up wealthy, and asked for the minimum sentence within guidelines. No one in the courtroom appeared convinced. Judge Thornton removed her glasses and looked directly at Stephen. Mr. Walsh, you've been convicted of multiple counts of securities fraud, wire fraud, money laundering, and tax evasion. Before I impose sentence, is there anything you wish to say to the court? Stephen stood slowly. For a moment, I thought he might actually apologize, might finally show remorse. Instead, he said, Your Honor, I maintain that I'm innocent of these charges. I made some questionable investment decisions, but I never intended to harm anyone. My wife's testimony was motivated by vindictiveness over our failing marriage, and the prosecution built their case on misrepresentations of standard investment practices. That's enough, Judge Thornton interrupted sharply. Mr. Walsh, I've reviewed thousands of pages of evidence in this case. Your wife's documentation was impeccable, corroborated by multiple sources, and supported by your own recorded statements. This continued denial of responsibility demonstrates exactly why a lengthy sentence is appropriate. She paused, letting that sink in. The victims in this case trusted you with their life savings. You systematically stole from them over a period of 3 years. You created sophisticated schemes to hide your crimes. You showed no conscience and no remorse. Even now, facing sentencing, you cannot accept responsibility for your actions. She opened a folder and read from it. Stephen Walsh, you are hereby sentenced to 22 years in federal prison on the securities fraud charges, to be served consecutively with 15 years on the wire fraud charges, 10 years on money laundering, and 5 years on tax evasion. Given the severity and duration of your crimes, these sentences will run consecutively for a total of 52 years in federal custody. Gasps echoed through the courtroom. Even Linda Morrison looked surprised. She'd recommended 20 years total, but the judge had multiplied that by making the sentences consecutive rather than concurrent. Stephen swayed slightly, gripping the table for support. 52 years meant he'd be 94 years old when released, effectively a life sentence. Additionally, Judge Thornton continued, you are ordered to pay full restitution to all victims in the amount of $8.3 million, plus court costs and penalties. Your assets will be liquidated and distributed among the victims according to the amounts stolen from each. You'll be eligible for parole review after serving 85% of your sentence, approximately 44 years from now. She looked up from the document. Mr. Walsh, you abused a position of trust to enrich yourself at others' expense. You showed no mercy to the elderly widow now living in a one-room apartment because you stole her retirement. You showed no mercy to Mr. Caldwell when you stole his money and slept with his wife. You showed no mercy to any of your victims. Therefore, this court shows no mercy to you. Bailiff, remove the defendant. As bailiffs moved to escort Stephen out, he turned to look at me one final time. His expression was pure hatred now, all traces of the charming man I'd married completely erased. He mouthed something that looked like, "This is your fault," before being led through the door. I felt nothing. No guilt, no satisfaction, nothing. It was simply over. Outside the courthouse, reporters mobbed Linda Morrison, who announced the historic sentence and praised the investigation. David Caldwell made a statement about closure and healing. Several victims hugged each other, crying with relief that justice had been served. Patricia and I stood slightly apart, watching the scene. 52 years, she said quietly. That's one of the longest white-collar crime sentences I've ever seen. The judge made an example of him. He earned it every year. I looked at my watch. I need to get back to school. I have afternoon classes. Patricia smiled. Of course you do. Go teach. I'll handle the remaining paperwork for your divorce finalization. That should be processed by end of week now that sentencing is complete. I drove directly to Riverside Elementary, stopping only to change from my court-appropriate suit into more comfortable teaching clothes I'd left in my classroom. My students were at lunch when I arrived, giving me 20 minutes to review the afternoon's lesson plan. Dr. Morrison appeared in my doorway. How did it go? 52 years? Consecutive sentences? He whistled low. That's extraordinary. You must feel relieved. I feel ready to teach math. My students have a test Friday and we're behind on decimals. He laughed. Then I'll let you get back to it. Rebecca, for what it's worth, you've handled this entire situation with remarkable strength and grace. We're lucky to have you here. The afternoon passed in the comfortable rhythm of teaching. My students knew nothing about the sentencing, the trial, the investigation. To them, I was simply Mrs. Ashford, who explained long division patiently and laughed at their jokes and made sure everyone understood the material before moving on. This normalcy felt healing, a reminder that life continued regardless of dramatic legal proceedings. That evening, alone in my apartment, I finally allowed myself to process the day. 52 years. Stephen Walsh, who'd called me his charity case, who'd belittled my career, who'd announced his plan to force me to quit teaching, would spend the rest of his functional life in prison. The victims would receive restitution. Marcus Flynn was already serving his reduced sentence. Jennifer Caldwell was divorced and in therapy. David was rebuilding his life. And I was free. The divorce papers arrived by courier Friday afternoon. Patricia had expedited the process, and with Stephen's criminal conviction eliminating any contested issues, the judge had signed off immediately. I was no longer Rebecca Walsh. I'd reverted to my maiden name, Rebecca Ashford, effective immediately. The house had been sold, the proceeds distributed to victims. Stephen's investment accounts, his retirement funds, even his collection of expensive watches, everything liquidated for restitution. I celebrated that evening by doing absolutely nothing special. I made pasta, graded papers, watched a documentary about ocean ecosystems I'd been saving to show my class. The divorce that should have devastated me instead felt like stepping out of shoes that had never fit properly. Relief, pure and simple. Monday morning brought unexpected news. Linda Morrison called asking if I'd consider speaking to a group of FBI agents training in financial crime investigation. Your documentation techniques were exceptional. The Bureau wants to use your case as a teaching example for civilian cooperation in complex fraud cases. I'm not sure I have time. Teaching takes up most of my schedule. It would be a one-time workshop. 2 hours on a Saturday. Paid, of course. And Rebecca, you'd be helping train agents who will work these cases. Your experience could improve how they engage with potential witnesses in the future. I agreed, curious about this unexpected development. The workshop took place 3 weeks later at the FBI's field office in New Haven. 15 agents attended, all young, all intensely focused as I walked through my investigation process step by step. The key is documentation, I explained. Not just what happened, but when it happened, who was present, what was said verbatim if possible, where documents were located, how I obtained them legally. Think of it like building a case for a research paper. Every claim needs support. Every conclusion needs evidence. One agent raised her hand. What made you confident enough to approach the SEC? Many people in your situation might have doubted themselves. I doubted constantly, but I'd spent 6 months verifying everything multiple times. I'd consulted with a lawyer about what evidence would be admissible. I'd cross-referenced Stephen's documents with public financial records. By the time I contacted authorities, I wasn't confident in myself. I was confident in the evidence. After the workshop, the lead instructor approached me. Mrs. Ashford, have you considered consulting work? Financial firms are increasingly interested in having someone review their internal procedures to identify vulnerabilities before they become criminal issues. Your skill set is unique. I'm a teacher. That's what I want to do. I understand, but think about it. You could do this part-time, help companies avoid situations like your husband's, and make significantly more money than teaching pays. He handed me his card. If you change your mind, call me. I tucked the card away, knowing I wouldn't call but appreciating the recognition. Teaching wasn't just my job, it was my identity, my purpose. I'd fought to keep it when Stephen tried to take it away. I wasn't giving it up for anything. Spring arrived with unexpected warmth. My divorce was final, Stephen was serving his sentence in a federal facility in Pennsylvania, and Marcus Flynn was at a minimum security prison in upstate New York. David Caldwell sent me occasional updates about the restitution process. Victims were receiving their first payments as Stephen's assets were liquidated and distributed. The amounts wouldn't replace everything stolen, but they provided some financial relief. Catherine Walsh's legal troubles had intensified significantly. The SEC investigation I'd triggered with my anonymous tips about her charitable foundation had uncovered extensive tax fraud. She was also charged as an accessory to Stephen's crimes after emails surfaced showing she'd known about his scheme for at least 2 years and had helped introduce him to several wealthy victims. Her trial was scheduled for fall, and prosecutors had contacted me about potentially testifying regarding evidence I'd found linking her to Stephen's activities. One Saturday in May, I received an unexpected visitor. Jennifer Caldwell appeared at my apartment door looking thin and tired, but more composed than our last interaction. "I know you probably don't want to see me," she began, "but I needed to apologize properly. Not over the phone, face to face." I invited her in, offered tea. We sat in my small living room, two women whose lives had been upended by the same man for different reasons. "I was selfish and stupid," Jennifer said simply. "I justified the affair by telling myself I deserved excitement, that David was boring, that Stephen made me feel special. I didn't think about consequences. I didn't think about you or David or anyone except myself." "You're right. You were selfish and stupid. But you weren't criminal. Stephen was. I lost everything, too. David took the kids. My parents disowned me when they learned what I'd done. The country club revoked my membership. Former friends crossed the street to avoid me." She looked at her hands. "I'm working as a receptionist at a dental office now, living in a studio apartment, starting completely over. That sounds like appropriate consequences for your choices. I deserve worse." She met my eyes. "But I'm trying to rebuild into someone better. I started therapy. I volunteer at a women's shelter. I'm trying to understand why I made such destructive choices." "Good. Keep doing that." I paused. "Jennifer, I'm not going to tell you we're friends now or that I forgive you. But I hope you do become someone better. For your kids' sake, if nothing else." She nodded, stood to leave. "Thank you for listening. I know I didn't deserve even that much." After she left, I felt strange. Not sympathetic exactly, but perhaps less angry. Jennifer was paying for her mistakes in ways that hurt, but weren't destroying her permanently like Stephen's sentence destroyed him. She had opportunity for growth, change, redemption. Stephen had only decades in prison to contemplate his choices. The asymmetry felt appropriate somehow. My final confrontation with Catherine Walsh came in June. She approached me in the supermarket, her expensive clothes looking somehow diminished, her usual imperious bearing replaced with barely controlled rage. "You destroyed my son's life," she hissed, blocking my cart. "You could have helped him, supported him, but instead you turned him in like he was some common criminal." "He was a criminal, Catherine. An uncommon one given the sophistication of his schemes, but definitely a criminal. He stole millions of dollars from people who trusted him. He made mistakes under pressure. You made sure those mistakes destroyed him permanently." Her voice rose. "You're vindictive and cruel, and you'll answer for this." "I've already answered. To federal investigators, to prosecutors, to judges, to juries. Every authority who reviewed the evidence agreed Stephen committed serious crimes. That's not vindictiveness. That's accountability. I'm going to sue you for everything you have. Defamation, invasion of privacy, anything my attorneys can think of. You'll pay for what you did to my family." "Catherine, you're currently under federal investigation for tax fraud and accessory to securities fraud based on evidence I provided to the SEC. You helped Stephen steal from people. You introduced him to victims. You knew what he was doing and you helped hide it. Instead of threatening me, you should be consulting with your own attorneys about how to avoid ending up in prison next to your son." Her face went white. "You're lying." "Check with your lawyers. The indictment should be coming within a few weeks according to the prosecutor I spoke with last month. I'll probably be testifying at your trial too. given that I found the emails proving your knowledge and involvement. I pushed my cart around her. Excuse me, I need to finish shopping. I left her standing in the cereal aisle, too shocked to respond. Patricia called me an hour later, half amused and half concerned. Catherine Walsh's attorney just contacted me threatening legal action. I told him about her pending federal charges and suggested he focus on keeping his client out of prison rather than filing frivolous lawsuits. He hung up on me. She confronted me at the grocery store, made threats. I'll document that. If she contacts you again, call me immediately and don't engage. The federal prosecutors will be interested in any harassment attempts given her pending charges. The school year ended in a flurry of final exams, report cards, and tearful goodbyes from students moving on to 5th grade. Several parents thanked me for being such a positive influence on their children. One mother pulled me aside. I don't know if you remember, but you spoke with me in October about concerns regarding my husband's financial behavior. I took your advice about documenting things. I filed for divorce in March. Your situation gave me courage to protect myself and my kids. I did remember. She'd reached out after seeing news coverage of Stephen's trial, asked nervous questions about recognizing financial manipulation. I'm glad you're safe now. We are, because you showed it was possible to fight back. She hugged me. Thank you. Summer break arrived with welcome relief. I spent June planning next year's curriculum, July volunteering at a literacy program for underserved kids, August preparing my classroom for the new school year. Normal life. Purpose-driven life. The life I'd fought to keep. Catherine's indictment came in late July, just as predicted. She was charged with tax fraud, filing false statements, and conspiracy to commit securities fraud. The evidence was damning. Emails showing she'd known about Stephen's scheme, financial records proving she'd benefited from the stolen money through gifts from Stephen, testimony from victims she'd personally introduced to him. Her trial was scheduled for November. I received a subpoena to testify, explaining to prosecutors the chain of evidence regarding the documents I'd found proving Catherine's involvement. Unlike Stephen's trial, where I'd felt some complicated emotions about testifying against my husband, I felt only satisfaction about testifying against Catherine. She'd spent years making me feel inferior, treating my career with contempt, pushing Stephen to devalue me. Now she'd face consequences for her crimes, and I'd help ensure those consequences landed properly. As August ended and the new school year began, I found myself reflecting on the year that had passed. 12 months since the investigation started. 10 months since the barbecue that changed everything. 8 months since Stephen's arrest. 5 months since his conviction. 3 months since his sentencing. The timeline felt both infinite and compressed, as if I'd lived several lifetimes in the space of 1 year. But more than that, I'd transformed. The Rebecca who'd accepted Stephen's condescension, who'd tried to make herself smaller to fit his expectations, who doubted her own worth, that woman was gone. In her place stood someone stronger, more certain, uncompromising in her values. I'd proven that intelligence and determination could topple empires built on lies. That documentation could destroy criminals who thought themselves untouchable. That refusing to accept being diminished could lead to extraordinary justice. My new students filed into the classroom on the first day of school, 4th graders with fresh notebooks and nervous excitement. I introduced myself, outlined classroom expectations, began building the foundation for a year of learning. None of them knew their teacher had spent the previous year dismantling a criminal enterprise. They just knew that Mrs. Ashford seemed kind and fair and genuinely excited about teaching, which was exactly how it should be. Stephen Walsh was serving 52 years in federal prison. Catherine Walsh would likely join him after her trial. David Caldwell was rebuilding his life with his kids. Jennifer was working on becoming someone better. Marcus Flynn was serving his reduced sentence. And I was teaching 4th grade, exactly where I belonged. The charity case had won. Comprehensively, devastatingly, permanently. And she'd done it not through luck or circumstances, but through patience, intelligence, and refusal to be diminished. That victory would sustain me for the rest of my life. Catherine's trial in November was anticlimactic compared to Stephen's. The evidence against her was overwhelming, her defense weak, and her attorney seemed to be going through the motions. I testified for 90 minutes about finding the emails between Catherine and Stephen, about the timeline of her knowledge, about the introductions she'd made to wealthy victims who later lost everything. The jury deliberated for just 2 hours before convicting her on all counts. Her sentencing came in December. Judge Thornton, the same judge who'd sentenced Stephen, showed no more mercy to Catherine than she had to him. "Mrs. Walsh, you enabled your son's crimes. You profited from stolen money. You helped him access victims while maintaining a facade of respectability. You've shown no remorse and no acceptance of responsibility. This court sentences you to 15 years in federal prison." Catherine collapsed in the courtroom. Her attorney requested she be allowed to self-surrender due to her age and health conditions. The judge denied the request, ordering immediate custody. As bailiffs led her away in handcuffs, she looked at me with pure hatred. I met her gaze calmly. She'd spent years trying to make me feel inferior. Now she'd spend the next 15 years in prison because of evidence I'd provided. After the sentencing, I drove to a small coffee shop near the courthouse where Patricia was waiting. "That's the last one," she said, sliding a latte across the table. "Stephen's in prison. Catherine's in prison. Marcus is serving his sentence. All the trials are over. You're completely free now." "It's strange," I admitted. "For so long, my life revolved around this investigation, these trials, ensuring justice happened. Now that it's done, there's this emptiness where all that purpose was." "Fill it with something better. You're 35, divorced, free of criminal in-laws, with a career you love. The world is wide open." She was right. Over the following months, I did fill the emptiness with better things. I accepted the FBI's offer to conduct more training workshops for agents investigating financial crimes, doing them quarterly on Saturdays. The consulting work I'd initially rejected became appealing when I realized I could help companies identify vulnerabilities before they became crimes, potentially preventing other families from experiencing what mine had. I took on 3 clients, reviewing their financial procedures and recommending improvements, work I could do evenings and weekends while maintaining my teaching schedule. The additional income was substantial, allowing me to move from my small apartment to a comfortable house with a yard and space for the personal library I'd always wanted. I furnished it carefully with secondhand finds and pieces that actually reflected my taste rather than Stephen's preferences. The master bedroom had windows overlooking a garden I planned to cultivate in spring. The living room had built-in bookshelves I filled with novels, poetry, teaching materials, and yes, some forensic accounting textbooks I'd used during the investigation. David Caldwell became an unexpected friend. He started dating again after his divorce from Jennifer finalized, processing his trauma through therapy and time with his kids. We'd meet occasionally for coffee, 2 people who'd survived Stephen Walsh's destruction and emerged stronger. "You ever regret how you handled it?" he asked during one of these meetings. "Going as hard as you did with the investigation?" "Never. Stephen earned every consequence he received. So did Catherine. I regret the years I spent accepting his treatment before I found the courage to act. I regret not recognizing sooner what he was. But exposing him, ensuring he faced justice, those actions I'm proud of. Jennifer asks about you sometimes, wonders if you'll ever forgive her. I don't think about Jennifer much anymore. She made her choices and she's living with consequences. That's enough for me. I don't need to forgive her or maintain anger toward her. I just need to move forward." Moving forward became easier as time passed. I started dating again, cautiously, with much better judgment about red flags. I took a graduate course in educational technology, expanding my teaching skills. I joined a book club at the local library, made new friends who knew nothing about my past, except that I taught 4th grade and loved poetry. This clean slate felt liberating. The media attention faded gradually. The local news moved on to other scandals. Reporters stopped calling. The Facebook groups that had discussed the case obsessively found new dramas to dissect. My life returned to blessed normalcy. Teaching, consulting, building a life that was wholly mine without the shadow of Stephen's crimes or Catherine's hatred. 2 years after that fateful barbecue, I received a letter from Stephen. It had been forwarded through Patricia per my instructions that he was not to have my direct contact information. She'd opened it first to ensure it contained no threats. "It's actually an apology," she said, sounding surprised. "Seems prison has given him perspective. He takes responsibility for his crimes and acknowledges how he treated you. He doesn't ask for anything, just wanted you to know he's sorry." "Do you believe it's genuine?" "Hard to say. Could be manipulation. Could be legitimate remorse." Does it matter? It didn't. Stephen's regret, whether authentic or calculated, changed nothing. He'd still serve 50 years. I'd still built the case that convicted him. The past remained fixed, regardless of his current emotional state. I wrote back once, briefly. I acknowledge your letter. I hope you use your remaining years productively. I've moved on completely. I didn't mention that moving on meant thriving beyond anything I'd imagined possible when trapped in our marriage. He didn't need to know about my consulting success, my teaching awards, the house I'd bought, the peace I'd found. That information served no purpose except potentially giving him something to resent during decades behind bars. Marcus Flynn sent a letter too, from his minimum security facility. His was more apologetic, explaining he'd been weak and corrupted by Stephen's persuasion. He described the classes he was taking, the therapy helping him understand his choices, his plans for making amends after release. Unlike Stephen's letter, Marcus's felt genuinely remorseful. I wrote back wishing him well and suggesting he focus on becoming someone worthy of the second chance his reduced sentence provided. My parents visited often, proud of how I'd handled everything, apologetic that they hadn't recognized Stephen's true nature earlier. We should have said something, Dad repeated often. Should have trusted our instincts that he was wrong for you. You couldn't have changed anything. I needed to figure it out myself. Sometimes the hard lessons are the ones we have to learn through experience. The third anniversary of the investigation's start arrived quietly. I marked it privately by reviewing the manila folder I'd kept, the original documents that had started everything. Looking at those bank statements, those emails, those early photographs now felt like studying ancient history. The woman who'd gathered this evidence with shaking hands, who'd been terrified of discovery, who'd doubted herself constantly, she seemed like a different person entirely. The current Rebecca Ashford was confident, successful, respected in multiple fields. She consulted for major financial firms on fraud prevention. She trained FBI agents in evidence documentation. She'd received commendations from the Connecticut Attorney General's office for citizen excellence in combating financial crime. And she taught fourth grade with passion and skill, influencing young minds toward integrity, critical thinking, and standing up for what's right. My students that year were particularly wonderful, bright, and engaged. One girl, Emma, reminded me of myself at that age, smart but quiet, often overlooked by louder classmates. I made sure to give her opportunities to shine, to show her that being underestimated could be overcome through persistence and excellence. She blossomed throughout the year, her confidence growing as she realized her intelligence mattered more than her shyness. On the last day of school, Emma's mother pulled me aside. I don't know what you did, but Emma's completely different now. She stands up for herself. She's excited about learning. She believes in her abilities. The mother's eyes filled with tears. You changed her life this year. I just showed her who she already was, I replied. Sometimes we all need someone to reflect our potential back to us until we can see it ourselves. That summer, I took my first real vacation in years. 2 weeks in Italy, wandering through museums and churches, eating amazing food, speaking bad Italian with patient locals. The freedom to go anywhere, do anything, answer to no one but myself felt intoxicating. I sent postcards to David, to my parents, to Patricia. One to Dr. Morrison that said simply, "Thank you for believing in me." When I returned, refreshed and ready for the new school year, I found a letter from the FBI Academy requesting I consider developing a full curriculum on civilian evidence gathering for their training program. They offered substantial compensation and the opportunity to influence how federal agents approached financial crime cases nationwide. I negotiated an arrangement that protected my teaching schedule. I'd develop the curriculum during summer and winter breaks, deliver it at the academy during school holidays, maintain my classroom commitment the rest of the year. The FBI agreed immediately, pleased to have someone with practical experience designing their training. This expanded role brought unexpected opportunities. I was invited to speak at conferences on financial fraud prevention. Major corporations hired me to review their compliance procedures. A publisher approached me about writing a book, not a sensationalized true crime memoir, but a practical guide to recognizing and documenting financial manipulation. I signed a contract and spent evenings working on the manuscript between grading papers and planning lessons. 4 years after Stephen's sentencing, the book published to positive reviews. Financial Self-Protection, a practical guide, became required reading in several FBI and police training programs. It sold modestly but steadily, reaching people who needed its information. I received letters from readers, women who'd used my methods to document their partner's financial abuse, small business owners who'd identified employee theft, families who'd protected themselves from scam artists. One letter particularly moved me. "I'm a middle school math teacher whose husband was stealing from his employer. I used your documentation techniques to gather evidence that protected me legally when he was arrested. Your book showed me I wasn't helpless. Thank you for giving teachers a roadmap to fight back." That letter reminded me why I'd written the book. Not for fame or money, but to help others trapped in situations similar to what I'd endured. Knowledge was power. Documentation was protection. Understanding financial manipulation meant being able to defend against it. Stephen's parole hearing was scheduled for his 44th year in prison, decades away. Catherine would be 85 when released if she served her full sentence. Marcus Flynn would be out in another year, having served 5 total with good behavior. The criminal justice chapter was essentially closed, leaving only decades of consequences for those who'd earned them. My life, meanwhile, expanded in ways I'd never imagined possible while married to Stephen. I adopted a rescue dog, a gentle golden retriever named Scout who accompanied me on morning walks. I traveled regularly, summers in Europe, winter breaks exploring national parks, spring weekends visiting colleges with my students' families who'd become friends. I dated occasionally, enjoyed myself, but felt no urgency to remarry. Independence suited me. Dr. Morrison retired after my 6th year at Riverside Elementary, and I applied for his position. The school board appointed me assistant principal, a role that leveraged both my teaching expertise and my newly developed skills in documentation and investigation. When budget discrepancies appeared in the athletic department, I conducted a quiet audit that revealed the coach had been embezzling through fake equipment purchases. When a parent claimed their child's failing grades were due to teacher bias, I compiled communication records proving the student simply hadn't completed assignments. My unique skill set turned out to be valuable in educational administration. 8 years after that barbecue, I stood in my garden watching Scout chase butterflies. The house I'd bought was now filled with memories I'd chosen. Dinner parties with friends, book club meetings in the living room, quiet mornings reading on the porch. The financial consulting work continued providing additional income that allowed me to sponsor scholarships for students from underprivileged backgrounds. The FBI work influenced how hundreds of agents approached their cases. But more than any external accomplishments, the internal transformation mattered most. The woman Stephen had called his charity case, who'd accepted years of condescension and belittlement, who'd almost lost herself entirely to his vision of who she should be, that woman was gone completely. In her place stood someone who knew her worth, who refused to accept being diminished, who'd proven that patience, intelligence, and determination could achieve justice against powerful adversaries. I thought about Stephen sometimes, imagining his daily routine in federal prison. The monotony, the loss of freedom, the decades stretching ahead with nothing but regret and consequence. Did he think about me? About the wife he'd underestimated so completely? Did he understand yet that his downfall hadn't been bad luck or conspiracy, but simple cause and effect? Treat people with cruelty, commit crimes with arrogance, assume superiority over those you've deemed inferior, and eventually someone you've underestimated will make you pay for every single mistake? Catherine likely harbored similar thoughts from her own cell. The imperious country club matron reduced to prison routines, stripped of social status and designer clothes. She'd spent years looking down on me, treating my profession with contempt, pushing Stephen to devalue me. Now she'd spend her remaining years branded as a federal criminal, her reputation permanently destroyed, her freedom gone. And I woke each morning in a home I loved, went to work influencing young minds toward integrity and critical thinking, consulted with organizations preventing the very crimes my ex-husband had committed, trained federal agents in evidence gathering, and lived exactly the life I'd chosen without compromise or apology. The contrast between our fates felt like perfect justice. On the 10th anniversary of that September barbecue, I hosted my own gathering. Friends from school, from consulting work, from my book club. David Caldwell attended with his girlfriend, a kind woman who taught high school chemistry. Patricia brought her wife. My parents drove in from their retirement community in Florida. Dr. Morrison came out of retirement for the occasion. We filled my backyard, the space where I'd reclaimed my life, with laughter, good food, genuine friendship. Someone asked how I'd managed to rebuild so completely after everything I'd endured. The question gave me pause. How had I managed it? Through absolute refusal to remain victimized, through converting pain into purpose, through recognizing that being underestimated was a weapon if you knew how to use it. I decided I deserved better. I finally answered. Better than being someone's charity case. Better than accepting cruelty as normal. Better than staying silent about crimes. Once I decided I deserved better, everything else followed. Documentation, investigation, justice, freedom. It all came from that one fundamental decision, that I had value, regardless of who tried to convince me otherwise. Later, as guests departed and Scout and I sat on the porch watching fireflies, I felt profound gratitude. Not for Stephen's crimes or Catherine's cruelty or the years of suffering, but for the strength I'd discovered through surviving it all. For the person I'd become through refusing to be broken. For the life I'd built from the wreckage of a terrible marriage to a criminal husband. Stephen Walsh had tried to make me nothing. Instead, he'd created someone extraordinary, not through his actions, but through my response to them. That would be his legacy. The charity case who'd refused to stay defeated, who'd gathered evidence with methodical patience, who'd brought down an empire of lies, and who'd emerged from the battle stronger than anyone imagined possible. The woman who'd served him cheese at that fateful barbecue, who'd heard herself called his charity case, who'd smiled through her rage and humiliation. She'd won. Comprehensively, permanently, satisfyingly. And she'd spent every day since that victory living well, which proved the best revenge of all. As I turned off the porch lights and headed inside, Scout following faithfully, I felt at peace. The war was over. Justice had prevailed. And Rebecca Ashford, elementary school teacher, consultant, author, administrator, and woman who refused to be anyone's charity case, was exactly where she belonged, free, fulfilled, and living proof that underestimating someone might be the most dangerous mistake you ever make.